Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Now that we are officially a good 8 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, many people are starting to have more discussions about the overall impact this is having on one's mental health. And there's been a whole slew of different scientific research studies that have come out just in the last month, really looking at the implications of this and the stress and the anxiety and the depression that has been associated with this. So I want to talk about what you can be doing, things to focus in on during this time, because this pandemic is still with us. We are not over the hump, and now we are starting to move into normal cold and flu season on top of still having the concerns with COVID-19. So I want to get into the heart of stress and really look at how this can have a really negative effect on our overall mental well-being, our clarity, our cognition, everything in totality, but also look at just a general sense of some of the new scientific research that's out there discussing the implications of anxiety and depression that are associated with the pandemic. So I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and I want to talk about stress because so many people are feeling the effects of this. So many people are still working from home perhaps, and you're not having that same social interactions. For students, maybe this was your first year going off to college and everything has been kind of turned upside down because of different protocols and following different local and state guidelines when it comes to mitigation techniques. So this can really start to take a toll, and you hear more and more about it in terms of how people are feeling. People are getting, as they say, the COVID fatigue, but we can't let our guard down in the same sense and just try and think that we can go about normal life, because this is still out there, and we are seeing the real impact as a society in terms of the people who are still being heavily affected, and there's still significant loss of life. So this is weighing on many people, and it's important to know why we need to be able to manage our stress and how we can actually avoid stress. We know that stress does so much damage to our body. We can look at the telomere length. So even at a cellular DNA level, we recognize that the exposure to chronic stress and anxiety really does a number on how we do, even in terms of longevity. We can look at homeostasis, just that overall balance within the body, and we know that that is certainly impacted by stress as well. We know that environmental implications can also play a role into this. So as I mentioned, for many people, your lives have been turned upside down and you're not working in an office environment. Perhaps you are still working from home. So many different changes. And we know that there are multiple pathways in which stress really has a grip on how we feel. And we can look at that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, known as the HPA axis, and how that impacts our immune system and what we can be doing. We know that the biochemical effects of stress are very complicated and are wide scoping throughout the body, but we know that cortisol is our primary stress hormone, and we can see issues that can arise within the adrenals. We certainly know that different neurotransmitters are impacted based off of our levels of stress, which is why we look at things like GABA. And when we do not have adequate GABA being released, this can have a play a role in terms of feeling anxious. So these are the things that we want to be able to focus in on. We know that if our serotonin and our GABA levels are kind of all thrown about because of higher levels of stress and anxiety, this will have a lasting effect on our overall sense of well-being. We can look at blood glucose levels right now, maybe because of stress or maybe low mood, you're not eating properly and we're having this glucose insulin imbalance, which in turns has a even more greater impact when it comes to adrenal dysfunction. We can look at how our antioxidant levels, our endogenous antioxidant levels, are greatly impacted due to stress. And when the body is under stress, how we start to diminish our protective antioxidant storage of things like superoxide dismutase and glutathione and catalase. This is really important because if we're not replenishing these things and we're not putting the powerful antioxidants back into the system, then we're really at a disadvantage. We can look at the long-term effects that our immune system feels due to stress. We can look at chronic inflammation that can be driven up due to stress. We can look at issues with digestion and ulcers. I mean, there are so many different ways in which our bodies react in a very negative way to chronic stress exposure. We can look at the lack of cellular energy being created, so ATP, for example. And we need to say, well, what can we be doing about these things? Well, we certainly know that there are many different nutrients out there that can help to offset the negative impact of stress. We can look at things such as L-theanine, which is a powerful amino acid that is sourced from green tea. And we know that that plays a really critical role when it comes to the body's natural release of GABA, that calming neurotransmitter. So we have these bits of science that we know that things from nature can be beneficial. We can look at adrenal support with things such as rhodiola and ashwagandha, these adrenal adaptogenic herbs that can create an awful lot of balance within the body. There's one thing in particular that I often like to turn people's attention to, and you can go to our website and actually check this out, and this is our ribose complex. Now, D-ribose is a very important sugar that is found in the body, and it is different from other sugars in the sense that it's not impacting our blood glucose levels. And this is important to keep in mind, because oftentimes when we think of sugar, we just think of, okay, if we have something that contains sugar, our blood sugar is going to go up. But D-ribose is actually very, very different. And this is something that is required by the body in terms of energy production. And when we look at areas that have high energy demand, we think about our heart, we think about our brain, we think about our skeletal muscles. So D-ribose has been shown to be very effective when we look at stress. And remember, when we are under stress, sometimes the little mitochondria, that little energy maker within the cell, loses its ability to properly produce adenosine triphosphate. So our ribose complex is this really great blend. It contains the D-ribose, but it also has acetyl L-carnitine, which we know helps to drive those fatty acids to the inside of the cell to help to create additional ATP. So we know that acetyl L-carnitine, very good for brain health, for mental clarity. When we think about all of the different aspects of how stress impacts us, acetyl L-carnitine along with D-ribose, very, very good option. Now, this also contains dimethylglycine. Now, why is that important? Well, we know dimethylglycine is required for over 40 different processes within the body, and we also know that it is a precursor for the manufacturing of glutathione, and we have to make sure we have stable levels of glutathione under periods of stress. So having dimethylglycine as part of this formulation also very, very beneficial. Now, this also contains that really great adrenal adaptogenic herb, rhodiola. So it's a great way for if you're feeling a little sluggish, you're feeling a little stressed out, you know, the weight of this pandemic is really getting to you both physically and mentally. Having a scoop of the ribose complex every day can really do so much, because we're hitting many of the different marks of those pathways and biochemical systems that we know stress is having a significant impact on. So there's a lot of ways that you can address this. The ribose complex, to me, is a really nice way. D-ribose has been studied in the setting of chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia because they have been able to show that when we replenish this key carbohydrate in the body, that the body responds really, really nicely. Now, we also know D-ribose has been studied extensively and shown to be effective in the setting of heart disease and congestive heart failure, for example. So we know that when people have congestive heart failure, the heart itself is very much so struggling to create energy, which is why people get very winded and they just don't have that ability to get up and do the things that they would like to do on a regular basis. So definitely go to our website and check out the ribose complex. But I wanted to just kind of give you a brief overview of some of the more recent studies that are out there looking at the impact of COVID-19, dealing with this pandemic, and how that's having an impact on mental health. So Penn State University came out and was talking about social media use and how this was linked with depression during COVID-19. And I think this is important because they said people can't stop checking their social media for the latest COVID-19 health information. And maybe you are telling yourself, I don't really want to look at that, but then you find yourself continuously going back and reading different things, which can once again drive up that additional level of stress. And in this study, which was published in the Computers and Human Behavior Journal, they were looking specifically at how it was that social media was kind of this driving force, because initially it was kind of providing information and emotional and peer support, but then they found that excessive use of this was actually exacerbating all of these things, and people's mental health was therefore being impacted in a real negative way because of this. Now, there was another study where they were looking at job security and finances and how this was directly correlated to increased anxiety during the pandemic. And this was a study done out of the University of Connecticut. And they started to look at, the unemployment rates and looking at people who were filing for unemployment benefits. And they found this very strong correlation, which would make sense, obviously, if someone loses their job or they're furloughed or something like that. This changes everything about your normal routine, unless you have a lot of money in reserves that you don't really so much, have that stress. But that's not the case for the majority of Americans. So this was published in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine, looking at the impact of the virus and the pandemic on the economy and employment, and finding this really strong correlation between negative mental health and how people are perceiving all of this. Certainly, there are other areas. There was a real interesting study that I thought, wow, I didn't even think about something like this, but they found that the suspension of fertility treatments during COVID-19 had really alarming mental health impacts. And this was published in a very popular and well-regarded journal called PLOS. And they found that because of the pandemic and the fertility treatments were not then available, that this really was having major psychological impacts on women, but also men whose treatments were canceled. So you have these people who are already perhaps struggling to achieve and maintain pregnancy, and then they go and they're investing all of this time and money and emotions into fertility treatment, and then boom, the COVID-19 hits and they have to stop all of this. So that was something that, I never really put a lot of thought into, but it really does make a lot of sense. And this was a study that they had done over in Canada, looking at the impact of lack of fertility treatment during COVID-19. Certainly looking at isolation is something that was really honed in on by many different research universities. And also looking at anxiety and depression being associated with medical care avoidance during the pandemic. So for a lot of people, this once again was a Canadian study done at the University of Toronto, finding that U.S. adults, so this was done, they were actually pooling all of their data from the United States, but they found that U.S. adults who experienced common symptoms of anxiety and depression were at an even greater risk of delaying their medical care or not even receiving treatment during COVID-19, because then you had concerns, is it safe to go to the doctor? Should I go into the doctor, or is my doctor's office even open? Are they offering only, virtual consultations? So there was so many different aspects that we have to really, factor in, and it impacts more people than we even recognize. And I think that this is important to really note. Looking at depression rates, looking at the amount of anxiety that people are experiencing, and then how is it that we can make those adjustments to kind of work our way through this. Obviously, having a strong support system, whether that be friends, family, having a social network certainly can be helpful, because it gives you someone to talk about your concerns or your worries about. Having good foods, it really can make a huge difference. I mean, it may seem kind of nonsensical in a way, but foods really do matter. And if you're already in a low mood or high anxiety state, and then we're just putting in all these processed foods and, bad carbs, not really the best idea, because it's not going to help the mental well-being. So trying to eat clean, healthy foods and maintaining a good, healthy blood glucose level throughout the day, so you're not having these peaks and valleys like a roller coaster, that really can make a difference. Looking at staying physically active, whether that's, taking a walk around your neighborhood, or even if it's, staying active within your house, doing some little bit of, light cardio or aerobic activity. These are things that can really make a difference in terms of how we perceive overall risk factors and how we perceive and manage our stress and anxiety. We know that there are many different nutrients that can be supportive. I had mentioned a couple earlier on, talked about theanine and rhodiola and ashwagandha. And most importantly, during this time, looking at something like that ribose complex that really allows for energy production, at the same time has these nutrients to help to enhance our antioxidant production, as well as mitigate or modulate the body's response to stress by having that rhodiola contained within that. So a lot of different studies out there. We certainly know many people are impacted because of the pandemic when it comes to your general sense of well-being. So certainly don't ever feel like you're alone. Make sure that you reach out to people, that you talk to people about your concerns. This is a normal thing that is occurring, and it is okay to talk about this. Like I said, there wouldn't be this many major universities, Penn State, University of Toronto, all these schools that are looking at this, and it's only been 8 months into this. So we know it's impacting a lot of people, and there are many different things that you can be doing in terms of lifestyle modifications, in terms of, meditation, yoga. There's so many different ways in which you can help to improve upon your mental well-being. There's so many different nutrients. Obviously, if it's gotten to the point where it's very, very bad, you certainly need to reach out and consult with your physician in terms of having better guidance when it comes to managing these types of issues, whether it be severe anxiety, whether it be depression. So do always keep that in mind, but you have a lot of control over your diet, over your exercise routine, also with the nutrients that you're taking in, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, so many different ways that you can enhance the way that your body reacts to periods of stress. Looking at things like glutamine, for example, we know that that's an important amino acid when it comes to the body's stress response. Looking at omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, krill oil, these can all be very beneficial to offset the negative implications of stress and anxiety. So that's all that I have for you for today. I just want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health Podcast.